here I am, a new professor, at UT, and like, what do I know? I'm assistant professor trying to set up my lab, and I'm being approached by all these drug companies. We did the studies, and what we found is,
when I was first understanding more and more about this subject, it was surprising to understand how the same physiological response can happen between men and women, but then desire doesn't occur. At least this is what I understood from, because I believe you were studying Viagra, and then you were looking at the similarities between men and women, and also the dissimilarities.
That's right. Yeah, that's a whole big, interesting area. I don't know if you want me to elaborate on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, what we find, so I'll just explain how we measure sexual arousal in the laboratory, and this holds true for men and women. We bring the person in, and they're in a room by themselves, so it's all very private and confidential, of course. And for men, they use what is called a penile strain gauge. So it's a device that fits over the penis when it's in a non-aroused state. And then as blood flows into the penis, creates erection, there's expansion on this strain gauge, and that indicates an increase in the size of the penis, which is, of course, highly correlated with blood flow into the penis. In women, we use a device called the vaginal photoplethysmograph. And what this is, it's a small tampon-shaped device that the woman inserts into her vagina. It emits a light into the vagina and measures the amount of backscattered light. So when a woman is aroused, there's more blood in the vagina. It's denser, less light's reflected back, and so we get a pretty accurate measure of how much blood is in the genital tissue. So basically, for genital arousal in men and women, we're talking blood flow into genital tissue. And with women, that's highly correlated with lubrication, because many people don't know this, that how lubrication occurs is there's cells in the lining of the vagina, and when there's enough blood in there, it squeezes the lubrication out. It doesn't come from a gland inside the vagina. So there's cells that line. So that's the genital response in men and women and how we measured in the lab. And so the typical scenario is they would come in and we show a non-sexual film, like a travel film, and just to measure their baseline amount of blood in their genital tissue. And that lasts maybe 3 or 5 minutes. And then immediately we show a sexual film. And the films we use for women are by women directors, so they're a little bit, they're not just immediate shots of genitals. Like, men are very visual. They want the, physical shots immediately. Women tend to like a little bit of a plot in their sexual stimuli. Yeah. So we show films that have been previously demonstrated to increase sexual arousal in women and not cause negative affect or anything like that. And then, so what you have is you have a measure of how much blood is in their genitals in a non-sexual state, and then how much blood is in their genitals when they're sexually aroused to the sexual videos. And we look at that change, so the increase from a non-aroused to an aroused state. And then usually you have several sessions. So depending on what you're studying, if you're doing a drug, you would do that in a drug scenario, and then a second session in with the placebo, and look to see how that change score differs. So what we find, getting back to a big way that men and women differ in their sexual response, is when we do that with men and we bring them in and we measure their genital arousal and we ask them, how aroused are you to this film? And sometimes we ask with a questionnaire afterwards, or sometimes, like in my lab, we've developed a device where they can monitor with basically a computer mouse that's fed into a program that gives us moment-by-moment changes in what they're saying on how aroused they are or turned off. And so we can look at how what their penis is doing compared to what's going on in their head, how aroused they're feeling, right? And in men, we find, and this is not just my study, this is many studies across the literature, there's a very high correlation. Like, you get about 0.9 correlation between the strength of their erection and how aroused they say they are. Okay, so very close connection. In women, we don't get that. We get about 0.23. There's a big meta-analysis, a review of the whole literature that showed you get about 0.23. So what this means is when blood flows into the genitals of women, for some women, that's very meaningful to their experience of sexual arousal, and they say, yes, I'm aroused. But many women don't even notice the change, and many women notice it, but it's not as important to their overall experience of arousal. Many more contextual factors, for example, come into play. And so you were mentioning that this has something to do with Viagra. And what it has to do with Viagra is, if you recall, Viagra was introduced in 1998 by Pfizer, and instant phenomenal success. I mean, it made billions in the first year, or $1 billion in the first year, I should say. And so the timing for me was pretty good because I joined UT in 1998.
Oh, perfect.
And at that time, no one was funding sex research. I knew that going into it. The NIH is not going to fund. The big federal agencies aren't going to fund women's sexuality research. And now all of a sudden, because Viagra was so successful, people were saying, well, what about women? What about the pink Viagra? What's going to be for me? There's already a difference in sex drive between men and women, and now you're going to make that even worse, And so all of a sudden, all of the drug companies started into the race to develop the first pink Viagra. And so here I am, a new professor, at UT, and what do I know? I'm assistant professor trying to set up my lab, and I'm being approached by all these drug companies. Can you run our initial trials for Viagra in women? Which was a phenomenal opportunity, and it was only because I was, the only one who had a sexual psychophysiology being set up at that time. So we did the studies, and what we found is Viagra. Now, how Viagra works, it's through a really brilliant mechanism of nitric oxide acting on genital tissue. So it opens up the blood vessels so that blood can flow into the penis and stay there. And, men and women are developed in the womb from the same primordial tissue. Like they have, little blobs that develop different ways. And for the men, it develops into the penis, and the swelling develops into the scrotum. And for women, it develops into the clitoris and the labia. So you got the same tissue, just formed differently. And so there's no reason to think that the nitric oxide isn't going to work on genital tissue in women the same way as it does for the penis in men. So we do the studies, and what do we find is that, wow, yes, there's more blood flow into the tissues of women with Viagra compared to placebo. But what we didn't find, which we found in men, which is when they took Viagra and the blood flowed into their penis, they said, I'm aroused and I want to have sex. So it affected both arousal and their drive or their motivation to want to have sex. In women, what we found is blood flowed into their genitals, but some of them didn't say they were more aroused. So that connection between the genitals and wanting to have sex or feeling turned on wasn't there. Not for everybody, but when we do this type of research, we look at averages, mean responses, and across the board, it didn't happen for women. So bit by bit, everybody withdrew from developing this type of drug for women.